this week's episode of Not DnD, brought to you by EN World Live. As always, I'm your host, Jessica, and this week I'm very lucky to have not one, but two guests with me here. I have Sam and Zach joining us. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hello, thank you for having us.
We're having you
thanks
back.
so much. It's
Yes,
good to be
having us
back.
back.
I was going to say.
Yes,
Was
so this
about a year ago now.
It was. You were last here July 2022, and we talked about Orbital Blues. And now we are back now in 2023 talking about Orbital Blues Afterburn. So that is what we're talking about. So if you are watching live, hello, thanks for joining us. If you pop any questions in the chat, we'll put them on the screen and try and answer your questions if they're relevant to what we're talking about and know the answers. And if you're listening to the podcast, links to everything we're talking about is in the show notes for you to listen to. So obviously we're going to be talking about Afterburn, but before we dig into that, I'm going to be a little bit nosy and ask about the two of you because I've missed you and I haven't spoken to you in over a year, and asking what your gaming highlights have been since July of 2022. So if you have, events you've been to, any particular games you enjoy playing that you want to shout out. So Zach, if I start with you, put you on the spot first.
I've been playing lots of games because it's really important as a designer to play and run games as often as you possibly can, and that's been really good. Mostly been one-shot cycling GMs. The thing I've been running a lot is Mouse Ritter. I've got a Mouse Ritter box set, The Estate, which is like a load of pamphlet adventures in a box, and is a sort of really neat way to play old school dungeoneering with that rodent theme that you don't see as often. And it was a real inspiration, Mouse Ritter, for the box sets we're doing as part of the Afterburn Kickstarter, actually.
Nice.
So yeah.
Nice, excellent. And Sam, what about you? Any particular gaming highlights in the last year and a bit?
For me, I have been playing a lot of the Genesis, which is a really miserable European post-apocalyptic RPG with my regular group after they begged and pleaded for me to run it for them. And in terms of like personal stuff, I really enjoyed going to London MCM this year because it was the first time that I really got to touch base with a lot of people who'd enjoyed Orbital Blues and people who read it. It was really eye-opening for me and very humbling. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, that's good. It's always nice when you get out in the world and people tell you they've played your game, because I think sometimes as a game designer, we're all sitting in our homes like making stuff and just put it out there online and it doesn't feel real. And then you meet people at conventions like, I've played your game, and you're like, really? Why? Oh, that's nice. Maybe that's just me. But anyway, that's awesome. I'm glad you've been playing some awesome games, and I think one shots or trying different games is really important for being a designer and just being a better tabletop RPG player. Hence why this podcast. But I'm going to move us on and talk a little bit about Orbital Blues and Sad Space Cowboys, which is the most wonderful tagline for a game ever. So we obviously did an episode last July. So if you're a regular listening to the podcast, you might remember. But for people that haven't heard of Orbital Blues and haven't listened to the previous episode, if we just do a little intro about the kind of the core book and what the game is. So Sam, what is Orbital Blues about? How do you describe it to people that have never heard of it before?
Orbital Blues is a game about sad space cowboys where players take on the role of interstellar outlaws and form a crew to go out into a galaxy that doesn't really care about them, doesn't really care if they live or die. Everything is controlled by corporations and big organizations. And you are just part of a very small crew trying to find their way in a crushing gig economy. It's perfect for emulating games in the style of Firefly, Cowboy Bebop, and like Guardians of the Galaxy, that kind of thing. If Starfield didn't hit a certain spot for you, then we think that Orbital Blues will.
What a tagline. Is that on the marketing promos for the Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, it's like the whole Sega do what Nintendo don't thing.
Right.
Orbital Blues does what Starfield don't.
Amazing. And thinking about Orbital Blues...
Let me get that on Twitter right now.
Well, I was just going to ask you a question, Zach. I was just going to say, so with Orbital Blues, I was going to talk about the mechanics a little bit. Mechanically, what is the game like? How do you describe it to people? So somebody's used to playing D&D and that's kind of their reference point. How do you introduce the rules of the game to them?
Yeah, so the principles that we try to lead with the game is that we want the game to be as simple as possible, so you can focus on playing a character and not doing maths. You pick a very simplified character that is trying to have a really defined role and set of characteristics within the genre we've chosen to go for, which in this case is like retro future space western dystopia.
Yeah.
So the first thing you do in character creation is that you pick like the vibe for your guy, which is just a pair it like the something, a word that kind of defines your position on the crew. You might be the hit, the smoker, the lovesick, the captain, and that's just like your character in one word, or maybe a few, depending on the line. And then the thing that you pick after that tends to be the trouble, which is the reason that your cowboy is sad in space. And it's an XP generator. So in a lot of games, you get experience points for being sad or killing monsters or doing quests. Whereas in Orbital Blues, you get experience points for being sad. And as a result of that, you pick the thing, your trouble, and that generates a list of prompts that kind of help you generate a backstory for your character. You build out a list of things that happen to them, or relationships, or places, or moments, or like defining features. And then you also have a set of experience prompts for like ongoing gameplay that relate to your character basically doing foolish or sad things that exist because of the fact that they have this sense of sadness, this ennui, this rage at the position of the universe. And what this creates very quickly is a really quick way of generating interesting backstory that relates back to the saddest thing that ever happened to you. It grounds you within the universe and gives you all these kinetic connections to people, and also gives you prompts going forward for how to be a sad disaster bastard who's just making terrible decisions.
If you need the guidance,
if you need the guidance,
yeah.
And with all those things working together, and all the characters in your crew having this set of role-playing prompts that kind of helps you play into the genre, you end up with a really strong sense of identity for the character and of position within the crew and within the game you're going for as a whole. The rest of the rules, everything you'd expect to do with like combat or leveling up or making a character or running a story, try to be as simple as possible to get out of the way that the thing we're here for, which is making characters that are situated in a story and are making those decisions.
Amazing. So yeah, that's a really good summary. I love that. And some in the comments saying they love the explanation of it being Sad Space Cowboys and the theme from the beginning. So mechanically as well, it being like a D6 system based on Best Left Buried, which is another one of your games as well. So if people have played Best Left Buried, I assume this won't be too far a jump from that. It'll feel familiar in some ways.
Yeah, the core mechanic is the same one we borrowed from Best Left Buried, where you're rolling 2 dice and you're adding a stat, which is going to be somewhere between 2 and 0 at character creation. In Orbital Blues, the 3 stats are savvy, grit, and muscle, which kind of tell you a lot about how we think these cowboys are in space.
Savvy, gritty, and muscly.
Yeah, hopefully. And then you're rolling those 2 dice, trying to get more than 9. And if you're in a position that is better than normal, you have something called the upper hand, which is you roll 3 dice and you get to keep 2. And if maybe things aren't looking so hot, it's against the odds. You're rolling 3 dice, keeping the 2 lower. Combat works in a similar way. The core mechanic is really just like roll some dice, get out of the way, maybe re-roll some dice if things don't start going well. You can burn through your hit points to be able to do more of that as things get a little bit hairy. But yeah, if you've played Best Left Buried, chances are you'll understand the bones of the thing when you pick it up and try to take it to the table.
Amazing. So Orbital Blues is out and available now, and it's been out for 2 years. Had a very successful Kickstarter, and people are loving the game. So what we're here to talk about today is the new Kickstarter for Orbital Blues Afterburn. So Sam, I'm going to jump back to you and ask you what is the Kickstarter about? What is Afterburn with Orbital Blues?
Afterburn is a collection of everything that we felt, well, not felt, but everything that we physically couldn't fit into the core book, core mechanics that we felt like were not missing, because the play experience of the core book is very full, but things that would enrich your experience with the game, depending on what kind of GM you were and what kind of storytelling tools you wanted. There's a ton of resources out there for fantasy games, like, you know, books of traps, books of dungeons, books of monsters, and with more grounded sci-fi, there's not as many resources. There are resources out there, but there's not as many resources out there. And so we felt like if there was anything more that we could add, we should add it. And what helped was seeing how successful and popular it was with people on the Soul Muppet Discord, on Twitter, online, saying, hey, I really like this. Have you ever considered doing X or Y? And a lot of times the answer for that was yes, we have, or yes, we did, but it just didn't fit. So one thing for that was, how does space travel work? You've got a really good example of how me and Zach approach things differently here, in that I was simply like, I don't care. It's like it's like Star Wars. They get from A to B and the ship does a thing. Sometimes it doesn't do the thing, and that's sometimes it doesn't do a thing and that's bad and you should fix it. But most of the time it works to get you from A to B, and that gives you a period of time to talk about things, be sad, smoke a cigarette, have an argument with your co-pilot, etc. But then obviously some people really like harder sci-fi of saying, okay, which part is broken, or which part do we need to get replaced at the next spaceport so we can make the next jump in under X parsecs or whatever. And that's fine, but that's the kind of stuff that needs more help for people who say, I have no idea about how space travel works, but I want my players to feel like we all know how space travel works. And you've got a really good sort of anecdote for this, haven't you, Zach, with how Connor runs games, or how you played games with an actual engineer that inspired you to do a lot of this writing?
Oh yeah?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I've played a lot of Orbital Blue since it came out, weirdly, and I expected
really?
I've actually played more of it than I've ran, which is very interesting. I've got friends that are willing to run the game for me, which is fantastic. But in the games we played, there's this sort of idea to me that specifically, and like just jumping back a few steps, what the goal of the Afterburn, at least the section that I was writing, is to basically create toolkits for GMs to make decisions and have ideas, and that sometimes be in the form of a random table, sometimes be in the form of advice or procedure or new rules or kind of spaces that we felt like more stuff was needed. Josh, our other co-creator, who's the artist for the book, but also does a load of really evocative writing of sort of in universe, in world writing for a lot of the advertising materials that are the art for the book. Has written a section of like spaceships that you could use. So we've got one on screen now, the Heavy Engagement Lancer, the HEL by Ria Vada Starworks, right? This is like an explanation of the kind of ship that your crew might use as their spaceship, and a couple more things like that. But specifically, the thing that's so fascinating to me is that because of the fact that this game is so deeply not the work of one artist with vision, it's the combination of the three of us, in me, Sam, and Josh. We treat things in different ways, and in that same way, it's not like Orbital Blues is a very vibe-based game that can cover really large amounts of things as long as it's set in space and you have depression. Like the Western element is kind of part of the economics of it and the feeling of, you know, the music and the energies and the medias that inspired us. But
And
it
yet
can
we
be
have
such a large selection. Yeah.
Sorry,
No, go on,
yet
Sam.
we have like expansions, or rather like adventure books that we've published that have had a Western feel to them in terms of like a Western genre, but
Yeah.
not a Western setting. They've been inspired by other cultures, and they're still fundamentally quintessentially Orbital Blues games, and settings. As long as as Zach said, as long as the thing of you're in space and things are not great, then that is the baseline. That's all that you need.
Yeah. But specifically talking about this, one of the tool sets that I wanted to create was like an understanding it could be used to fit like how things could work differently to fit different types of game. So we don't say here's how spaceship travel works.
Yeah.
It's instead here's 3 different ways that faster than light travel might be possible and what effect that would have upon your game. If faster than light travel is immediate and can take you anywhere in the universe, your GM has to prep a lot more stuff because you could suddenly immediately go anywhere. And it's incredibly easy to run from the law because the galaxy is enormous and you could be anywhere. And there's lots of complications like that. Whereas if you have space travel working in a way that, you know, it takes 20 years to get from one star system to the next, or even you can't, and even the travel between systems can take weeks or months, between planets in the same system could take weeks or months, that's going to leave you with a really grounded feeling. Never mind if you start looking at like how time dilation would work. I've just ignored that bit entirely. Whatever. But
good point.
We've started talking about like how things would change if you thought about the world in different ways to encompass the way all those different games would work. The thing that Sam teed me up for, though, is that I've spent the last year or so playing in a couple campaigns now of like really quite hard sci-fi Orbital Blues, almost borrowing from stuff like The Expanse, right? Or maybe the less cinematic bits of Bebop that feel a little bit more grounded. And Firefly, another good reference there, where like Connor, who is the GM I've been lucky enough to play with a fair bit, has like a quite good understanding of how spacecrafts might actually work and has an internal sense of logic for the whole thing.
Cool.
And I've always had this thought process that if I know how to dungeoneer, I've done it enough in my head, and I've played enough old school dungeoneering games that you gave me a 10-foot pole and a pickaxe, I could clear the goblins out of any dungeon, right? Because I've spent enough time doing it that I've learned how it works, right? Because ultimately the verbs you use to interact with a dungeon are very human. It's poke this, step here, open this door, do this, things that like normal people can associate with. Whereas with stuff in space, you know, the saying "I'm not a rocket it's not rocket science" is weighty here because how these things might work are really complicated. But I've now played enough Orbital Blues that I think I know how an Orbital Blues spaceship works. I also think I know a way to explain to you how an Orbital Blues spaceship might work in a quite approachable way that then leads to interesting ways of problem solving, you know. And there's ideas there and principles about like explaining how you could use these things to solve problems and think about ways. And obviously anything that you can use to repair a spaceship, you can also use if you're trying to heist a bank or do any number of problems, right? Because you've got the foam sealant can that you use to stop hull breaches, and you have a pneumatic splint that stops things from breaking, or a laser drill, right? And once you put those 3 things together, you could probably break into a bank vault. I don't know. Sounds like fun. But it's like by giving the equipment, like explaining how these things work, you're handing your players loads of new verbs for exciting things to happen. But yeah, Afterburn itself, it's full of, as well as this big adventure I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, bunch of stuff that is going to be really useful, hopefully, to any RPG player. And obviously, we've spent the last 10, 15 minutes talking about like one book of all the different things that we've got as part of the Kickstarter.
Yeah, so there's
so
a lot of
it's
stuff.
expansive.
Could you give us an overview of all the stuff? Because I've got a picture on my screen now with all the stuff. People listening, Sam, tell me about all the stuff in the Kickstarter.
The stuff.
The stuff.
There is. So as part of this one, we have Afterburn, which has the ship catalog by Josh that Zach mentioned. There is the GM's storyteller's guide that covers the how does space travel work, tips to engage with space in space words sort of talk. A lot of like how we have ran this, how we have found this as it's been in actual play. And then you have Rogue Anthems, which is a collection of adventures to further expand the Orbital Blues range, and that is coming in a thematically anachronistic VHS box. Turns out it's really hard to find a VHS box.
Is it? I'm surprised.
In this day and age, and it's
so
even more difficult to find someone who will make you things in a VHS box. Zach has been on that quest for a while now, and it was quite long. It was quite long. And then we also have a box set of the previous adventures that we put out for the last Kickstarter. Finally, fully rendered in physical, all fully illustrated, all edited and passed over by me, Zach, Josh. So they're all in keeping with the sort of tone, the atmosphere, the vibes that people love so much about the setting and the game in play. And we also have was it today we announced solo play?
Oh.
Yeah. We've got a zine. It's called Orbital Blues Wanderer, which is solo play rules for a sort of hybrid solo play journaling game
nice.
where you use alongside your sort of normal dice set some poker chips and a card deck, and it helps you generate a story that you won't need a GM for. It's a thing we often get asked about, and it's in for the sort of final stretch goal we're hoping to hit in the next 2 days.
Because the Kickstarter, I should have mentioned at the beginning, is ending in about 50 hours at the time of recording this live. So that's on November 15th. So if you are at all interested, it would be worth checking out very quickly. Is there going to be a pledge manager afterwards or anything if people are listening to this?
There should be, but it will probably take us a few weeks to set it up. So if you are listening to this in a magical future after the 15th of November, I'd recommend you head to the Soul Muppet web store at www.soulmuppet-store.co.uk. And from there, you'll be able to find a link to our Discord server, which is generally speaking, the best way to stay up to date with announcements. And also, you'll be able to get from that web store, you sign up to our mailing list, you get a free Orbital Blues adventure. And you can also grab a copy of the Quick Start for Orbital Blues and also a bunch of our other games for Let's Left Buried, Gangs of Titan City, Inevitable, all have free quick starts and character sheets, and most of them have an adventure as well. That you can find on that page. So I know I'm probably meant to be doing all the link shilling at the end, but it's good to get a sort of if you do think this sounds great, that's the place to go to.
Excellent, great, and links will be in the show notes of the podcast if you're listening to this and just want to click through instead of typing it in. But going back to Afterburn, because you briefly mentioned adventures, so your different settings have adventures. What can you tell us about the adventures that you get in Afterburn?
The ones in the VHS, Zach knows more about than I do, as I've been writing the main adventure in Afterburn, which is which is a system of 5 planets or core locations, creating a sandbox for people of any experience level to use or set their games in for Orbital Blues. It's got some tentative links or little nods to the adventure that's in the core book, so you can carry straight on from there, or you can come in with fresh characters. And then the 5 adventures that are in the box set for Afterburn are completely new adventures written by a cast of guest writers.
Oh, cool. Zach, could you tell us a bit more about those?
I think if now we hit the stretch goal, I think there's 6 in the base box. I think there's 7 total. Now we've hit a stretch goal. There might be 8. So in Rogue Anthems, the adventures are all set within a single system that aren't as connected together as the other ones are. The idea these can be a collection of one-shots. We've got a selection of stuff from different authors. We've got spaceships, salvage operations, gunfights on lonely cities. We've got sort of drone manufactured, prefabricated towns being built you get to explore. One of the fun things about working with guest writers is that you get such different ideas to what we'd put in our own Orbital Blues adventure that come from a mix of cultures of play and also of like physical cultures on Earth as well. So it's good to get a sort of broad spectrum of different things. Orbital Blues players do lots of different things. It tends to resort to crime or bounty hunting, but you can always get a mix of different stuff. And we've tried to appeal to that across the box set. The kind of meta plot is it's set in a system that's recently been damaged and is the process of being sort of recolonized following a corporate war, which is what happens when two intergalactic mega corporations decide to spend their resources blowing each other up rather than to make the most profit, which is something that is probably inevitable in that far future, but we deal with it a little bit in the book. And the idea is it's a collection of them together to be used either as a sort of loosely linked campaign or a series of one shots that you can use there. And I've also plotted a little book about how to kind of smush them together, and also specific advice on running Orbital Blues as a one-shot using these pamphlets. Because you want to change the rules slightly just for the pacing, mainly to make sure that level ups are happening a little bit more often so that the experience points you're actually feasibly going to level within one session rather than waiting 3 or 4 as it might be if you're playing at a normal pace. But yeah.
Yeah, because as a core game, Orbital Blues is very narrative driven, and it can take a couple of sessions for that narrative and those ties between your player characters and your NPCs to get going, and that's where the game really shines. So for one-shot play, it needs to be condensed and refined into a much more bite-sized sort of format, so you're still getting that experience.
That's awesome. It's good to know that there's different advice in the Storyteller's Guide for the different styles of play and things you do, because I think sometimes when people are running a game, there's kind of those fears about how you approach it. So just having somebody talk you through it and being like, hey, this is how we did it and what works can just sometimes make it feel a little bit more approachable to kind of play. So we've gone through. So we've got, the ship customization and outfitting and tech rules are coming in there with, the ships that we talked about. A whole load of adventures that you discussed there, depending on which tiers and packages you get. I also want to talk about androids, because I noticed in this you had android player characters, which looks like a new exciting thing, and I'm very intrigued. So please tell me everything about this.
So androids were something that quite a few people asked after, along with aliens, when the book first launched, and we had very little interest in doing aliens. We wanted space to be a very human place where a lot of its failings and its evils and its good came from people. And we didn't want to chalk it up to an other or some kind of monstrous force or higher force, whatever. Everything was just a very human story.
It makes it feel more lonely then as well, doesn't it? If it's like it's just humans, there's nothing else. That kind of leads into the sadness of being a sad space lonely cowboy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing out there that's going to come and save you from your own troubles, which is something that I often find myself thinking about very philosophically whenever aliens hit the mainstream news. I'm just kind of like, oh man, I hope those aliens have a better sense of morality than some people. So I personally felt like I wasn't equipped as a writer to do that justice in the way that I wanted to. It's very hard to, in my opinion anyway, write an alien culture that feels truly alien and not just cribs inappropriately on some real world culture or just something that is strange to me as an individual.
Yeah.
So with that, with like aliens, kind of like, you can do it if you want, but we're not going to do it for you, with a line drawn underneath it. And we still could. We then looked at androids, and I looked at androids. I'm a big fan of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Blade Runner, and the sort of human elements that brings up, particularly the age old thing of, is Deckard a replicant? Which is a largely like a hotly debated thing that we won't get into here. But I think that as a question of, am I a robot made for a purpose or to emulate a person, that to me felt intrinsically like an Orbital Blues trouble. And that was prime sad real estate for, have I been made to fill the shoes of someone who has passed? Am I aware of that? Have I been made to serve a corporation or a corporation's ends? And in turn, that like raised a lot of like moral and philosophical questions that some I felt like I was prepared to and equipped to answer, and then others I wasn't. And so what we've ended up with is, in this system where the adventure takes place, androids have been created in part as a bit of a science fair flex, and also as a bit of a, hey, let's make robots so that nobody else has to die unnecessarily due to hazardous work environments. Let's make a robot that can tolerate the heat. Let's make a worker that can lift the logs on the planet, that does the lumberjacking, etc. But part of that is, it was built by a conglomerate of different engineering companies that were always trying to outdo each other in terms of the android's features, and they've kind of ended up making them too smart for their own good. And they've gone, hey, we were built, but we weren't built to serve a company. We weren't built to just chop wood. We're our own people, and we're leaving. And now you have this kind of corporate espionage taking place in the galaxy, where plans and blueprints for how to build more androids have gone as far as you want them to in the galaxy. If you're running Orbital Blues and you don't want androids in your setting, then fine, they're just not there. But if you want them everywhere and you want to run like a Blade Runner style game, then you can say, okay, well, this is a system where androids have proliferated. And we've written up a small list of android unique gambits and troubles. So you can be a particularly sad robot, or you can be, have particular things about that are unique to your robot status. But in turn, the role-playing sort of structures set around you will be a little different. Have you been made in the image of someone who is deceased? Have you been made as a copy of, say, a CEO to replace them should anything happen to them? Are you aware of that fact? If you are, how does it have a toll on you mentally? If you aren't aware of it, how will it have a toll on you when you inevitably find out? That is a peak Orbital Blues moment identity crisis, in my opinion. So it just it's expanding players' options in ways that I felt comfortable in writing and exploring. I myself had like a big kind of like identity crisis of, what purpose do I serve as a person? What's my role in the world?
Yeah.
As I know a lot of people did post lockdown, but it was one where I was like, what does my work mean? What does my writing mean? What was I put on this planet to do? And I don't have an answer for that. And I don't think many people do. And it's not something that we always want to really face in a role-playing game in a sense of escapism. But Orbital Blues is a game that asks you to look at like the big questions, and asks you to look at, what makes this person tick, for better or for worse? What drives them forward and keeps them working? Or what is it that keeps leading them to their own downfalls and their own pitfalls? And the android dilemma, as seen in like Philip K. Dick's work, and explored in the Blade Runner films, is something that I felt was like premium Orbital Blues material to explore. Of, am I a robot, or am I just confused? Surely I can't be a robot. That's absurd.
Yeah, I mean, I love the concept of it. When I saw it in the Kickstarter, that was one of the elements I was most excited about, because I love the idea of being a sad robot in space. So thank you for adding that in and making that an option that people can sprinkle in their games as much or as little as they like.
Yeah, that was the key thing for me, was that I wanted to write a solution for, if you don't want this, that's fine. Because, like, you know, I ran Dungeons and Dragons in university like 3 times a week. And every time someone joined, someone would like drop out due to study, someone new would join. And the amount of splash books I had to keep track of was insurmountable. And I like it when books say, you can use this if you want. Or you can not use this if you don't want. And a lot of splash books are just kind of like, here's a new thing in the world. And it's just there, and your player's like, but it says it's in the world. And I'm like, trying to explain author's intent and individual world building can become a bit of a headache sometimes. So I was like, have as much or as little robots as you want.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think with almost any game and any table, it is up to you. Even if it says in the rule book something there, if you don't want it there, guess what? It's not there. The person that wrote the game isn't going to come around and tell you off. And I'm assuming you won't do that at some Muppet Publishing.
No.
I'm not going to come around like, you're doing
we just
it
can't
well.
keep track of what you do at home. If you want to run Orbital Blues like as a super gonzo Borderlands style game, go ahead. Tell me how it goes. Your characters will probably die, but go ahead. Have a blast.
Go ahead. Why not? Speaking of like the tone and the vibe, as you said, it's a very narrative driven game and it has specific themes. And one of the ways you've really encouraged that is through music. Zach, could you talk about the importance of music and how that plays into Afterburn and Orbital Blues?
Yeah, absolutely. So Orbital Blues, and it's in the name, is a game about like music and the sort of the spirit of Americana and how that exists in this far future. And it's it's a game where we explicitly in the character creation tell you to come up with what in music in academic musicians would call a leitmotif. I don't know why I went for that. A favorite song your character has that plays while they do cool things. You're encouraged to think of that, and that's something that's in the minds of us when we're making stuff. There are a bunch of this. I think there's at least 3 official Orbital Blues playlists flying around now. One I made, a couple that Sam has done over various eras, and obviously an official soundtrack now. And as of about an hour ago, we hit our 3rd cassette EP that you can now purchase as part of the crowdfunding project. Nice. So it was one of the things that we sort of agreed on quite early on. This is a game of a really distinctive set of soundtrack, and we wanted some kind of music. And I think I said to Sam, we should get a vinyl done or something. You can do that, right? And then Sam said, and it's been an interesting financial decision for me personally. We need to put it on a cassette instead.
Full-on cassette,
that was 100% correct.
Everyone at the time was doing vinyls, as was the style at the time. And I had a few friends who collected vinyls, and quite frankly, I was kind of tired of them and a little scared of them and how fragile they seemed. And I always thought that cassettes were cooler. So I was like, let's get it on a cassette. Doesn't matter if anyone can play it. We could hide something on there, like a developer's commentary or something. If someone actually does figure out how to play it, that'd be cool, right? Yeah. So there you go, Zach there with the cassette. And it just so happened that Zach knew an RPG creator who was also a musician, Chris Bazette, who we got to musically cosplay as the Deltas and come in as a fake an in-universe band and fill the cassette with actual music, so you didn't just get us two being like, hey, you've managed to play this cassette somehow, now we're going to tell you all the secrets of Orbital Blues.
So they can just listen to this podcast for all the secrets. So
yeah.
And so for the full backstory for this one is that Josh's art was, a lot of it is like in universe. So as you flip through the book, you are confronted by advertising posters for spacesuit brands and pictures of everyone's favorite starship and examples of a holiday retreat on a Dyson sphere you can go to, and all of this like in universe diegetic art that exists. And one of the things we had a few of was band posters, and we had one for a band called Holly Astro and the Flyboys, and we had one for the Deltas, which then got like, we said to Chris, we want you to be an in-universe band. Here's one of the things we had, and then they were like, yeah, cool, I'll do that. That sounds like fun. So it was a fun writing challenge. We've added 2 more cassettes since to the project. We've done a really successful actual play podcast series that was been run by My First Dungeon. We did a sponsored actual play with them, the final episode, which is coming out tomorrow. And as part of that process, they were going to make music anyway. This incredible musician called Behold, Colin, was going to make a bunch of music for us for the podcast anyway. So we've put it on a cassette, and then I wanted to get Chris back. Like we talked about, Orbital Blues is different genres of game for different members of the creative team and focuses on different things. It's also different types of music. Sam, yours kind of focuses on country music a little bit more than me, kind of early rock, like Springsteen.
Mine is like Americana. That's the music that I grew up with, the music that my family had. And the biggest influence to my writing and my storytelling over the years has always been songs and songwriting. People say like, oh, what's the big inspiration behind Orbital Blues? You must love Cowboy Bebop. And I'm like, well, yeah, I do, but I would say that like my biggest inspiration for Orbital Blues is just music. And some people are just like, oh, okay.
Well, I'll follow one. Instead of saying, oh, okay, I'll say, is there a particular song for you, Sam, that was a big inspiration when writing for Afterburn? Maybe hard to pick this one.
I would say that the biggest thing that gave me the idea was oh my god, The Distance by Cake, which is a song about a man driving round and round in circles on a racetrack, and that like image really stuck with me. The first Orbital Blues was very much like a sort of Born to Run kind of Springsteen inspired affair. Zach plays with a lot more jazz motifs and noir motifs, and has always wanted to write a noir inspired mystery. Am I right for Orbital Blues?
Yeah, it's one of the things I'm looking at. People, when people ask what my thing is, I am very basic. I just do really like Cowboy Bebop. I think it's pretty cool. I think Orbital Blues does contain multitudes and can be lots of different things, but for me, the big musical inspiration for this one is, I've been listening a lot to an album by a Japanese pianist called Ryo Fukui, if I'm probably saying that wrong. And Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen is the lead track from the album A Letter from a Slowboat, which is what has been like my big Afterburn writing piece for all the stuff I've been doing. But yeah, it's a lot of jazz for me. And so when we asked Chris back for album 2 for the crowdfunding, for this new crowdfunding project, we're going to get some kind of experimental jazz album, and that should be
Oh.
fun. I've got no idea what that's going to sound like, but we've had some early pieces sent over that we're able to share, and that's really fantastic. So, yeah.
Well, that has fully answered a question that we had. That somebody said, "Have you had a player compose their own Sad Space Cowboy Blues as part of the game they've run?" And the short answer is yes. It seems like everybody has a playwist for it. You've got official ones made.
Holds music is.
Yeah, and all the actual players have them as well. So yes is the answer to that question.
Yeah.
We are coming up near. Sorry.
No, sorry, it's all right. I'll just ramble otherwise. Please go ahead.
Well, I love that. That's the best thing as a podcast guest. The worst is when they don't talk. I was about to say, with that, we've been talking a lot, and we are coming up near to the top of the hour and running low on our time. So if you're watching live now, it's time to ask any questions you haven't had answered. And I was going to say to both of you, is there any kind of like closing thoughts or things you want to share about Orbital Blues Afterburn that you haven't had the chance to yet, maybe? So I don't know, Zach, if there's any kind of closing words or summary you want to share about the game.
I think I've got through all the big hitters.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about most of the stuff. We've gone through what's in the adventure. We've talked about the music. We've talked about the inspirations. We've talked about the process. I think that's most of the exciting stuff.
I guess the only thing to say is to go back it on Kickstarter while it's still live right now. Links on the screen if you're watching. In the show notes if you're listening.
Yeah.
But Sam, what about you?
For me, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who has backed it, supported it, loved it, or loathed it. Any kind of feedback is good. But for me, it's like just having a reception to it. People always say that a second album or a sequel to anything is the hardest thing to do. And so like expectations are high, but we know that there's people who are excited for it and are really like anticipating it. So I just want to say thank you to all the people that have backed it, supported it, loved it, thrown their weight behind it. It's really cool to see like a follow-up Kickstarter, which whilst the original book is available as part of that Kickstarter, it's very much for pre-existing fans. Like it's great if we bring more people in, but this is for people who generally like already know what Orbital Blues is. And so to see it get as much traction as the first one and now surpass it is really crazy to me, that people love it that much that they want to back it a second time around and throw their support behind even more Orbital Blues. And as I said at the start, going to MCM and working the Soul Muppet stand and meeting fans was really cool. People would come up to the stand and I'd say, I'd do the usual sales pitch. And so, hey, can I sign you up for a copy? And they'd just be like, I've already got one. I backed the Kickstarter. I just wanted to come see you guys. And I was like, that's so cool. Thank you. That was really nice. So thank you to everyone for the support and for the general good vibes that people put out towards Orbital Blues. It means a lot.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And as in the comments, congratulations to you both and the rest of the team to see the Kickstarter doing so well. I'm excited to see it close in 2 days' time on November 15th. And then if people missed out, like Zach mentioned, if you go to Kickstarter, there'll be links to the backer kit afterwards. Or if you go to the Soul Muppet website, there'll be information there. We can sign up on the newsletters. And with that, I think I will take my time to say thank you to both of you, Zach, Sam. Thanks so much for coming on and coming back, actually. So I clearly didn't scare you away last time. Yeah, maybe this same time next year, back talking about another game, maybe. How about that? Sound good? I know right now you're thinking we have to finish Afterburn. Let's just finish this Kickstarter, Jess, before we start talking about the next one. But yeah, best of luck with the Kickstarter, and see you next year, maybe.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.